Welcome to Speaking of Service, the podcast that uncovers practical ways to grow service revenue, control costs, and improve customer satisfaction. If you're looking to innovate, gain a competitive edge, or just learn about the latest service trends, you've come to the right place. Tune in to today's discussion where Chris Wolf has the pleasure to speak with Alexander Ouellette, Innovation Manager at Harpak-ULMA, to speak about how measuring data has been the recipe for success with their customers.
Understanding the performance of equipment is key to the success of every manufacturer, irrespective of industry, size, or location. If a machine runs at 1 or even 10% greater efficiency, that can equate to tens of millions of dollars over the course of just 1 year. The crux is, how do you identify where those efficiencies can be made? In this episode, we're speaking with Alexander Ouellette from Harpak-ULMA. Harpak-ULMA is a company that excels in product-to-pallet automated packaging systems for food, medical, pet food, and industrial products in North America. We'll delve into Alex's work and how measuring data has been the recipe for success for their customers. You may recognize Alex's name, certainly his face. Recently, Anthony Moffa, my co-host, and I took Speaking of Service on the road and spoke with a number of PTC customers about their path to digital transformation. Today, I'm delighted to speak with one of those customers, Alex Ouellette, Innovation Lead at Harpak-ULMA. Alex, welcome back to the show. Just tell our audience a little bit about yourself and the work you do for the company.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So, like you mentioned, lead innovation at Harpak-ULMA. Innovation is a broad topic, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different companies. An example is more recently, innovation departments have been handed, well, we need a way to implement AI. But previously, they've done everything from new product introduction to sustainability to, for Harpak-ULMA, for the better part of the last decade, that's meant IoT and AR, and not just implementing those technologies, but understanding meaningful ways to bring them to our customers.
So talk to me a little bit about the population of human beings and machines that are your customer, for lack of a better term.
Sure. So there's a pretty wide spectrum. I would say, they're all united by a necessity to really optimize these processes because there's a lot of external pressure on them. But if you think about someone producing anything from med device implants to, like you mentioned, pet food to, palletizing cartons of eggs, there's a lot of differences amongst those industries, but things they have in common is that they have trouble hiring enough people, right? They have very, very diverse workforces in terms of age, languages spoken, cultural background. It's very, very diverse. And oftentimes, what those people run into is very different perspectives on the plant floor. If you're a maintenance lead from one country that was born in the '60s, you might have a very different perspective than someone born in Southeast Asia who's in their early 20s, and you might not even speak the same language. So a lot of it is even getting a handle on these very, very complex organizations that our customers manage.
And Harpak manufactures long-lived machines. I assume the same is true of the population of equipment that's out there in your customers' locations, both brownfield as well as greenfield environments.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a very heterogeneous mix of equipment, meaning it's not just our equipment, unfortunately. We would love if our customers only bought everything from us, but in some cases, that's just not possible, right? There's equipment in the line that we don't even manufacture. And we have situations where we have machines that we've sold customers 30 years ago running next to lines that were installed 6 months ago. And so you're exactly right. There is a very diverse population of equipment out there that we support and that our customers need to be able to use just as effectively if it's brand new as if it's something that's been there longer than most of their employees.
In our intro, we talked about Harpak's recipe for success being the ability to improve because you're able to measure the performance of this diverse set of equipment. How do you go about doing that?
It's a good question. So, I think one of the things that has been really foundational to our success is the perspective that if you can't measure something, you can't really improve it. So, for us, when we were looking at, what are our customers' pain points, we realized that we didn't really know. We could make guesses based on phone support logs or anecdotal feedback, but we didn't really have a good understanding of how our equipment was being used day in, day out. How is it performing? Maybe you could get production data out of a customer's MES setup, but you weren't really getting the granularity to say, hey, this person was stuck on a film change for 40 minutes. There wasn't that wealth of data. And realizing that made us take the approach that we do want that data. We do want to know how our assets are performing at customer sites so that we can have that data to actually, prioritize how we fix those things. But if you don't know what the problem is, how can you go about solving it? Was kind of our perspective.
And in terms of the value that you're bringing to people, you're bringing value, obviously, to the folks on the production line and their managers, but you also have to be bringing value to the service technicians who are going to go on site and address that issue, and even the design engineers who created the system in the first place.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, no one wants to show up to work and be frustrated by a task that isn't clear, or by something that they have to do repetitively, or something that's, a challenge. So going through that flow that you just talked about, right? Maintenance engineers on the ground, they don't want at a customer site to be like, oh, every single day I start my job and I have to do this, menial procedure on this piece of equipment just to get it to run right, or to have, hey, I was getting ready to take vacation and this machine broke down, so now I need to stay here 14 hours to do this preventative maintenance that really should have been done 6 months ago, but now it's ruining my weekend, right? Because somehow those things always happen on a Friday as you're getting ready to go out the door. So there's that population. Same thing with the floor workers, right? If there's a procedure that they need to know to keep that equipment running, many of our customers will profit share or do some kind of incentive for the plants where there's actually a direct financial incentive for them to hit production quotas, right? So they don't they're not incentivized to take longer on a lot of these things. So if there's a way for them to do something in 10 minutes versus 20 minutes, but it requires them to, again, dig through an outdated manual, or that information isn't readily available to them, it's a huge quality of life impact for them. And then for our service technicians, they don't want to maybe hop on a flight or hop on the road and show up and be like, the service equivalent of this meeting could have been an email, right? Like, you could have just gone through this procedure and fixed this yourself. Why did I just, travel this far to do something that really you could have done yourself and spend a higher premium for us to do it than you to begin with?
So I see you having to balance and figure out that ratio of, is the juice worth the squeeze on every repair? What is the value of a single point of improvement in OEE in hard numbers as well as in, soft experiences for your end customers?
Yeah, I think that it really it can have a significant impact. I mean, it depends on what you're packaging, but we have customers that, a single point of OEE, if they run those lines, we have one customer that comes to mind. They run about they run about 20 hours a day, 363 days a year. And that's a huge amount of production. So if you decrease from 99 to 98% OEE, it's millions of dollars for them. Even though the product that they're producing isn't super high value, they might make $1 per product, somewhere around there. If you're producing, 500,000 of them a day, or whatever that number is, and you tick 10 off of those, it adds up over time. So it's a very good example of like consistency mattering. And if you can consistently put something up by, 0.5% or 1%, it's going to have a very, very big financial impact on that organization.
Just offline, when we were first speaking, you were talking about your personal love of ultra marathons, as well as now your commitment to training as a competitive weightlifter, and how that's really science game of making, it's a game of incremental percentage points. Talk to me about the mindset that comes into that mindset of continuous improvement.
Yeah, so I think for continuous improvement and how you approach that, right? I think, if you treat it similar to, uh, painting or sculpture or any athletic endeavor, you do the broad things first, right? So for a lot of, let's say OEMs or companies in our space, the first thing they did was digitize their, machines, right? Use modern computer-based controllers, what have you, and our customers did the same thing. They got a lot of value out of that, disproportionate amount of value, one might argue. And then they put in, basic maintenance plans, and they get a small amount of value, but still a very large amount of value. And kind of where I'm going with this is the cost increases each time they move up that process, right? Doing something like implementing an IoT infrastructure at the enterprise is over the lifetime of it probably significantly more expensive than doing something like updating to new, digital based PLCs for most factories, right? There's just a long tail of costs on the IoT perspective, and it still pays for itself, right? There's still a significant amount of value that's brought to that, but it is not as disproportionate as the previous steps, and it's harder. So basically, what I'm saying is along each of these steps, the higher and higher you get into, modern manufacturing or totally optimizing where you're going, the first 20% of improvement that you get may take 5% of your total effort. And the last 1% of improvement that you get may be half or 60% of the total effort of the organization to get that 1%, but it can still pay for itself, right? It's just the further you optimize things, the harder it is to make those changes. If you've just started playing baseball and you're learning the fundamentals, you can be like, wow, I'm twice as good the next day as I was the previous day. Whereas if you've been in the MLB for 5 years, you're probably fighting for the most minute of changes that you can affect with a lot of effort. And that's kind of how it goes with continuous improvement and the mindset that we bring to our customers. There's a lot of easy stuff that we can do, but as we get more and more sophisticated and we're really trying to push that value, it's going to take more effort and you have to be more sophisticated in your approach, right? How you measure things, the process behind it, the things that you're trying to improve, even how you go about capturing that value. Because it may be that, for instance, you can super optimize this process and do all this complicated stuff to really eke out that last bit of value, or you can put in motion sensitive lights in your plant and save the equivalent cost of energy just by only turning on the lights when someone's around it. So, there's a balance, right? And common sense plays into that. But generally it's, it gets harder and harder the more you go through it, but it still pays for itself at every step of the way if you're approaching it with, a critical mindset, I would say.
I'd imagine the executives that you talk to are all abuzz about AI, and most of your business improvement is coming through machine learning and applied settings. Talk to me a little bit about AI washing and where the state of the industry is around continuous improvement using the data that you're able to capture.
Sure. So I think there's, much like the other technologies that I talk about a lot with PTC being AR and AI, or AR and IoT. AI is a tool just like anything else, and it requires kind of a critical approach about how you're going to apply it. If you just walked up to any enterprise and said, you're not a digital enterprise and we're going to go through an industry 4.0 transformation at every aspect of your organization from soup to nuts, you're probably not going to do super well. It's probably going to be very expensive and you're going to spend a ton of money and effort and really struggle to create tangible change at any level, right? And AI is kind of the same thing. It requires identifying very specific problems that you are trying to solve and saying, is this the right tool to use on this problem? And an example here would be, for many of our machines, they use drives to power the motors to run them, right? And they're a relatively expensive component, enough that your average person would balk at paying for one out of their own pocket if it broke down. So there can be, a dozen of these drives on these machines, and if they're running them with improper settings, they can shorten the lifetime of the drive or cause them to critically fail, and then you can't run production at all, right? A good, concise, clear application of AI that we've worked on with our customers is, well, let's monitor these drives and monitor the behavior that leads to failures and simply build into the HMI or to the device system, hey, you're running this machine a little too hard, just like if you were flooring the gas on your car every time you pulled out of the driveway. You're probably shortening the lifespan on some of these things. Let's both recommend that you change that behavior, but also give you a recommendation that if you continue it, when is that going to burn out the machine? And that's like a pretty quick payback because of the difficulty implementing it. It's relatively short scope. Your payback because you can just look at your overall drive lifetime. And if you extended it to be, within reasonable ranges, how much money you're going to save, all this stuff. It's a very digestible problem with a clear payoff and it's time bound, right? Versus let's just, dump everything in our team site for the entire enterprise in a chat GPT and be like, how should we improve our business? Is probably not going to yield really good results, right? The gist here is like, it's a tool. IoT is a tool. AR is a tool. All these things are tools. You don't pick up a hammer, go looking for stuff around your house to use the hammer on. You say, I have this issue with my house. What is the correct tool to solve it, right? I think that's the takeaway I would have. A lot of organizations going to be like, we want to use AI for everything, everywhere. But the ones that are successful are going to be the ones that define their use of AI as solving very specific problems.
Shifting gears a little bit, one of the very specific problems that you have to address as an innovation lead is that technicians employed by Harpak-ULMA are going to factory locations where things such as food for human beings and animals and pharmaceutical products are being packaged. Those are highly regulated industries. How have you brought innovation to the task of ensuring that those technicians are performing within the compliant regulations of the industry and the customer?
Yeah, it's a good question. And ultimately, I think, for us, IoT has played a really big role in this and how it can integrate with, other technologies. So, for instance, for our customers' self-service, right? A lot of them care about the same things that we care about when we send a technician there. They want to make sure it's done correctly, repeatably, and they want to know it. They don't just want, a signature on a form of paper that says, "Hey, this is done correctly." So some of it is, for instance, like on certain procedures that we have our technicians do, they'll use Vuforia Vantage and almost have like a compliance and inspection checklist where they'll go through whether it is checking that a machine has been properly locked out or tagged out or prepped for sanitization or whatever, it may be. They're using it basically as a companion, locking their photos, and through insights, it's tracking, hey, I know that John Doe did this task on this line at such and such a time, right? It's very traceable, I guess is the takeaway there. We can take that farther if you're using something like, step check with Vuforia, where you can actually have, some kind of confidence interval on, hey, we can also predict that like there's a 90% probability that he did this correctly, which obviously further helps our customers digest that and have faith and confidence. But I also think that like, that's a very tactical example of some of the stuff. But I think the other aspect of it is just from a cultural perspective, being an organization that does want to measure these things, that does want to track these things, that, we can say when we are going in to deal with a new customer and they're saying, well, hey, like, what is your availability of service technicians? Or what are the sort of things we can do? Or how reliable are they? Being able to pull up the data and the metrics to say, whether it's out of ServiceMax or whatever system is being used, to say, hey, these are all the service visits we've done in your area, and these are all the tasks, and this is their breakdown in skill, and this was, the NPS score of how our customers scored the performance of those technicians, right? There's two parts to it, right? Having the culture of continuous improvement and like that culture of traceability is just as important as tactically being able to do it step by step on individual tasks, right? They work hand in hand to reinforce that trust with our customers.
When you set out on this job, I mean, anybody who's spoken to you can tell that you're a very common sense, pragmatic guy who has taken on the task of leading innovation in a business that is very metrics oriented. When you set out on this journey, assembling your toolkit, setting your goals in mind, what were your priorities and expectations, and what have been your proudest moments?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think one of the things that really was effective or really helped was having an executive culture that believed in this from the top down, and wasn't necessarily didn't initially approach it as we want to improve this metric by 10%, right? Or that metric, right? They also kind of approached it as we don't know what we don't know. So let's lay out a pathway to explore this. We have a vision for the broad capabilities that we want to bring to our customers, but we don't necessarily know how or why certain technologies are going to be effective. We can make a best guess, but we're going to be okay making mistakes, right? Like, which is a great thing to hear from your leadership, to know that you don't have to get it right the first time, or that, hey, we are going to try some, initiatives that may fall flat on their face, and some things that we're skeptical about may turn out to be really, really successful. So I think generally, to talk about our process, we did break down from a technology standpoint where we wanted to go just to remain competitive, whether that be, replatforming machines with a certain controls infrastructure, connecting those machines to systems like ThingWorx and being able to monitor them, right? Just see how they're performing as a baseline, knowing that we wanted to get into augmented reality. We didn't necessarily know the full breadth or depth of it. Having an idea of like, well, common operations and maintenance stuff probably makes sense, but like, what are some areas of opportunity that we don't know? We're going to inform that with the IoT data, and then kind of pulling them together and doing more work with AI down the road is kind of like a broad outline of how we need to approach it. But there was never we want to, commercialize this on XYZ date, or we want to see these kind of returns as a result for that. And very transparently, even without a commercial aspect to it, we have definitely sold machines and won deals and been successful simply by investing in these technologies and having a culture around being kind of somewhat ahead of the curve on many of these things. Our customers want to feel like they're also in that realm, that they also have AI adjacent things, whatever. And so they're going to go with us in that regard. I think as far as one of our biggest successes, we did have a series of processes or a series of procedures that we did on one particular product family that really only experienced technicians were ever qualified to do. Very few customers were able to do it. It was a huge pain point because it took forever, being, anecdotal, realistically 1 to 2 years to train someone to be able to do this task. This is a huge headache. And what we were able to do is, decompose the problem, break it into digestible bites for the first time, have an understanding of the overall process, where the pain points were, what have you, and then actually build out that as a series of euphoria experiences. They have step check. So there's an AI component to them. they're tracked, all that data is logged. We have full traceability across the entire process, where now we can even say, what is are certain components in this machine wearing out faster than they should, where we never had insight into that before. And now we can actually deploy this to a new worker and have them do this task successfully, whereas before, and have quality information on it, whereas before it was like, basically just trust that this guy did it correctly. So it's been a huge value add for us as an organization to learn how to do that and to kind of have those capabilities that we can bring to bear. And for many of our customers now, when selecting a partner to go with, you have to do a similar process on a lot of industrial machines. And ultimately, if you're rebuilding a tool and one customer is like, hey, even if you still have us do it, we can guide you through it and teach your people how to do it over time, versus like the just trust us mentality, they're going to be a lot more likely to go with us.
That's interesting. You're using this kind of growth mindset enablement as a competitive differentiator with your next generation of customers. Can you talk a little bit about the pitfalls that you may have run into that you'd recommend others be aware of?
Yeah, I think it comes back to when I was talking about AI, right? Scope your problems really, really small, right? Like, even if there's like some problem that you're trying to solve, that let's say it's, you scope it out as 5 distinct units, right? For how people process information and perceive each other, you're probably better off succeeding in 5 little increments than just one giant big increment, just because it demonstrates consistency and progress to a lot of people, versus even if the same amount of work into it, they can be like, oh, well, this other thing is a fluke, right? So I think having really narrowly, tightly defined problems that you're trying to solve and a really tightly defined scope to a lot of the things you're trying to do is really, really essential. We did not always succeed in that. And I think it's become, really, really important to where we're going in our continued success. I think the other thing is understanding that you have a really diverse, or let's say understanding your client culture is a really big one, right? We have very, very, very diverse customers, and a med device company in Southern California versus a meat packer in Northern Canada, very, very different, culturally very different approach to their work, and not saying one is better than the other, but they're very different, right? And how you interact and how you project manage, and even the expectations around a lot of that, are very, very different. And so almost taking like a people first approach with a lot of these engagements would be another lesson learned there.
You've certainly come a long way in your services journey from a break fix mentality to this kind of a growth mindset focused on the personal ambitions and goals and dreams of the people there, as well as the businesses that you serve. When you take a look maybe 5 years down the road, what's the business going to look like for you? What's innovation look like at Harpak-ULMA in, say, 2030?
I think a lot of the technology that people consider to be, new and shiny will kind of just be standard offerings with a lot of the machines, right? Whether that be IoT or AR capabilities, service optimization, even being more predictive about a lot of those things. I think those will be very out of the box functionalities, and I think it'll almost be a competitive disadvantage if you don't have them at that point. At this point, think about digital PLCs, right? If you have them, people would kind of look at you funny. So kind of in that realm, and I think a lot more of the leading edge then is going to be very practical out of the box applications of AI, right? Like right now there's, different utilities, I guess I would say, that operate in, as kind of bolt-ons to existing systems. But I think more of where we're going is going to see, an AI integration with your ERP system or with your workforce management solution or whatever it may be, that now, if you can connect it to all those systems, doing things like maybe we won't be doing the predictive maintenance for our customers' machines, but we'll just be sending that data up with a recommendation to whatever, their business AI agent is, and they're going to schedule it around their production and order forecasting and da da da. So even though there's like 3 equally applicable weekend time slots, they're going to do it the furthest away from when they see a demand surge, so they have time to fix it in case, it takes longer, or even doing that based on what the range of, fixed possibilities is. So I think that, a lot of the leading edge technologies now are going to become a lot more mature, right? You'll take some basic AI utilities for granted in the same way that when Outlook auto schedules a meeting for you, you're like, oh, it's convenient, like, cool, whatever. Like, I'm not wowed by this. It's just part of my life in the background. And the more sophisticated uses of AI and how AI interacts with people is really going to be where we're investing.
Well, raising the bar on the wow factor is sure a fact of life for all of us in technology, I guess. Before I let you go, we were chatting. I'd love for you to share with our viewers your plans to attend the Olympics in Paris.
Oh, yeah. So this summer, as a lifelong weightlifting fan, this could be the last Olympic quad when weightlifting is still in the Olympics as they update the program going into Los Angeles. There's always that, will a sport make it, won't it, unless it's one of the big premier sports like swimming, gymnastics, track and field. So very excited to get to go and see, hopefully, Team USA win their first gold medal in weightlifting in the better part of half a century. So it should be fun.
I'm sure the Europeans have been dominating for a long time. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Thank you, Alex, so much for joining us.
Eastern Europe is very hard to beat. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Been just a pleasure. So viewers, thank you for joining us here at Speaking of Service. We invite you to reach out to the team here and to Alex if you have more questions for him. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Service podcast, brought to you by PTC. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a rating or review. And be sure to check out other episodes to hear new perspectives on improving life for aftermarket professionals, service teams, and the customers they support. If you have a topic of interest or want to provide feedback, email us at speakingofservice@ptc.com or visit us at ptc.com/speakingofservice.